I'm Don Stacy, an unpublished novelist, and this is a reading from The Impressionist. I intend to read the entire manuscript, eventually. After she had gone out on her first actual date with Bernie, when they'd gone to see the Fellini film, Sheila kept reflecting on their simple physical arrangement in which she lived on the second floor and Bernie lived on the fourth floor of the same apartment building. At first, she couldn't get over their proximity to one another. This fact alone, she thought, lent a sense of both ease and risk to their blossoming, deepening romance. But then again, she thought, they were both mature, experienced people, and if they ever did happen to quarrel someday in some horrible, protracted way which would lead them to putting an end to their relationship, they might happen to see each other later on, taking the stairs in opposite directions at the same time, for example. Or see each other in the parking lot, or they might run into one another at the mailbox hut at the entrance to the parking lot. But Sheila's imagined a moment of some future awkward encounter on the second floor stair landing, for instance, did not deflect her intentions to see him again. And when he mentioned that Justine had invited him to see her in Bellingham, and she welcomed him to bring along a guest if he wished, and would she like to go with him and have Thanksgiving dinner at Justine's place out in the country? She said absolutely, of course she would. During the drive to Bellingham, the time required to get there passed almost without notice while they talked. I'm glad we smoked that indica of yours back at the rest stop, Bernie. This is how I like to take a road trip, sailing along within a canvas-induced daydream, not too far removed from reality. So tell me about Justine. What's she like? What's she like? Bernie glanced at her a moment, then returned his gaze to the road. Well, as I've explained, she was in essence more than just my father's mistress for several years. She was like a second wife to him. You could even say concubine, I suppose, or sister wife, as the few polygamous Mormons still out there in the barren reaches of southern Utah, Arizona, and Nevada referred to their extra wives. But of course my mother's role in this situation was involuntary. And when she first found out about it, she was more than just fucking pissed. She was righteously outraged. And she let Dad know about it too. She wasn't shy in the least when it came to talking about her marriage with him in front of me and my sister. As Jack rode the bus into Walla Walla, he was thinking about Estella and the brief time they'd recently spent together. Apart from Sheila, Estella had been his mainstay, his far-flung anchor keeping him sane. They had made love with prolonged abandon. Later she asked him if he would consider coming to see her for Thanksgiving, when both her son and daughter and their 5 children between them would be there. Neither of them were currently married, she reminded him, so unless they brought along some new special friend, either her son or daughter or both, that would be the extent of the guest list. Jack took little time in giving her an answer. After only a moment's thought, he told her that he might be able to make it, barring any conflict with his work and travel schedule. He knew that being with Estella and her family would give him a renewed sense of belonging, and now that Sheila had apparently taken up with that tight-ass Bernie, he was more inclined than ever to accept Estella's invitation. They were eating dinner. They were eating the dinner Justine had prepared: prime rib roast, baked potatoes, as well as sweet potatoes, homemade cranberry sauce, broccoli, and spears of asparagus, the thin turkey bisque, and for dessert a 2-layered cheesecake she had fashioned. Bernie and Sheila had brought along 2 bottles of Merlot and 2 bottles of Pinot Grigio. They had a splendid meal during which they all spoke freely and with lifted spirits. They purposely avoided discussing politics even though all 3 were progressives, while Justine also regarded herself as well ensconced in the socialist camp. She had long viewed the United States as structured and guided primarily by the very rich, the laws themselves forever in favor of corporate intentions and control. In fact, she felt the United States was morally bankrupt in terms of observing and furthering the public good. The skinflint, miserly Republican shills in Congress would prefer no such advancement. Following their meal, Justine remained at the table after having tuned her FM radio to a Canadian station which broadcast the news and classical music, and they listened to Haydn, Mozart, Grieg, Copland, and Hovannes. Meanwhile, Bernie and Sheila took on the task of washing all the dishes and cookware and restoring Justine's kitchen to its usual well-ordered and spotless appearance. And while doing all this, on occasion, Jack, like Hermes, the messenger of Olympus, stepped back and forth between the kitchen counter just next to Sheila, who stood directly in front of the sink, and Justine, all the while conveying a tobacco pipe filled with a good strong cannabis. The mood there in the kitchen, now one of less overt levity, brought about an altogether different set of remarks, many of them imbued with fanciful speculation. All 3 of them tossed out hypothetical variants distinct from the actual current state of affairs of any given situation. They ventured into the numerous uncharted areas of psychology, cosmology, the law as well as ethics. Then they were on to the incorrigibility of roughly 10% of the population, who all eventually turned to one form of crime or another. They talked at length about the forces which shape a sociopath or a psychopath from boyhood, and who, once they are adults, continue to take delight in the sadistic harm of another person, often a stranger, making such acts even more inexplicable, and who later acquire a ghoulish taste to commit murder, taking a contorted orgasmic pleasure in doing so, inflicting harm, inflicting pain, inflicting a merciless death after conducting his grotesque tortures of an innocent stranger, often a woman. In other words, the most vile subhuman imaginable, roaming freely in plain sight, trolling for his next victim. Almost all of these serial killers are men, and their profound hatred of women is particularly self-evident. Needless to say, Justine intoned from the kitchen table, criminality in the United States has become ever more dangerous and treacherous. The police must assume everyone has a gun within reach for the simple reason that many do. No thanks to our gun laws, which may as well not even exist. Welcome to the 21st century Wild West, which has engulfed the entire country in endless sporadic carnage. You know, Bernie said, sometimes I've wondered just what is the percentage of mass murderers who were also in the military at some earlier point in their lives. Yes, that would be fascinating to know, said Justine as she looked at Bernie. Then she shifted her gaze towards Sheila, who had just finished draining the sink, and she said, But if it was shown by statistical and documentary evidence that a large majority of mass murderers had served in the Army or the Marines, such a fact would hardly be surprising. After all, the military trains its new members in the various ways of killing people quite efficiently. In a crowded city, an AK-47 becomes a weapon of mass destruction. And don't forget, Sheila said to her, that military training desensitizes all those new green recruits toward the pain and suffering of their targets or anyone else nearby, enemy or civilian. Bernie said, and part of that is the derisive slang they use. The Germans were the Krauts, the Russians were all some vodka-swilling Boris or Ivan or a mere commie. The Japanese were reduced to the Japs or the slant eyes. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong were called either gooks or slopes, and those in Iraq and Afghanistan are called towelheads and God knows what else. Sheila said, well, even little kids who won't hesitate getting into fights call each other chicken shit, faggot, or if they happen to be eloquent, a cowardly dog, though there's not much chance of that. They all laughed for a moment. Once their laughter had subsided, Justine said, but in 99 cases out of 100, and probably quite a bit more, it is simply impossible to reform someone who has suffered a twisted upbringing and childhood from birth. No, Sheila said, agreeing. There's no way a dedicated asshole with a killer instinct is ever going to change. You're right, that's impossible. Toward 9 o'clock, having consumed a few cups of coffee, Sheila and Bernie thanked Justine once again for the splendid meal she had made, thanked her for the wonderful time they had spent together with her. The women hugged one another during this farewell, then Justine initiated a hug with Bernie and whispered into his ear, don't be a stranger. Call me whenever you feel like it. And treat Sheila well. She's one of a kind. Then she pulled away from him and said in a lifted voice, have a safe trip back to Seattle, you two. Bye-bye now. It was really sweet, it was really swell meeting you, Justine. Whenever you come to Seattle, you have to come to see me and Bernie as well. We're not living together, but we're not far from it either. Both of us in the same apartment building like we are. Bernie and Sheila then got into his Subaru, and he slowly wheeled the car around, drove back out the private road leading to Justine's house, and soon disappeared into the blackened night. The Thanksgiving celebration held at Estella's home was, of course, more populated and far more festive than the one at Justine's. Estella's daughter, Claudia, brought along 2 pies she had made, and her son's oldest daughter also carried in some homemade dinner rolls, which she had baked only twice before. Jack found these very good with their yeasty taste of fresh bread, and ate 3 of them, as well as an entire turkey leg, a generous heap of mashed potatoes, nearly as large a pile of young unshelled peas, and a slice each of Claudia's 2 pies, pumpkin and blackberry. Jack kept everyone amused with a seemingly inexhaustible series of quirky observations and ad-lib remarks about what any of the others had said. Later, he and Armando, Estella's son, tossed back a few shots of whiskey from a bottle the fellow had brought along in his coat pocket. After they had all departed, Claudia and Armando, both having set their mother's kitchen to rights as they had done countless times as children growing up, Estella and Jack fell into bed, and after a brief bout of lovemaking, Jack soon fell asleep, while leaving Estella awake with a sad, gentle smile on her face as she watched her traveling man snooze in a witless, drunken slumber. Then she too soon fell asleep as well.